Look, cardiogenic shock is not just low blood pressure. That is a dangerous oversimplification. What we are really dealing with is a complex syndrome of failing cardiac output, systemic hyperperfusion, rising lactate, massive organ dysfunction, and incredibly time-sensitive decision-making. And here is the harsh reality. Despite all our modern ICU capabilities, advanced mechanical support, and incredible cardiac care, mortality remains stubbornly high. We're still hovering around that 40 to 50% mark. Why? Because when a crashing patient rolls through your ICU doors, the actions you take in those first few critical minutes literally dictate their entire trajectory. Hello and welcome to this explainer on the latest Lancet 2024 review of cardiogenic shock. I am thrilled to walk you through this critical material today. We're going to tackle this by adopting the calm, authoritative mindset of a senior intensive care consultant right at the bedside. Our goal here is to take all this complex, heterogeneous physiopathology and translate it into a highly practical, bedside-oriented approach that you can immediately put to work in your unit. So here's our game plan. We'll start by defining the shock syndrome, then look at the pathophysiology and sky staging. After that, we'll build out your rapid ICU bedside assessment, followed by a 10-step management framework. Finally, we'll wrap up with targeted meds, revascularization, and mechanical organ support. Let's get right into it. Starting with Section 1, defining the shock syndrome and recognizing our highly heterogeneous enemy. Okay, first things first, we've got to address a massive knowledge gap. Cardiogenic shock is not one single disease, right? It is a wildly heterogeneous syndrome. Just look at the sheer variety of etiologies here. We're talking everything from acute myocardial infarction to right ventricular failure, post-cardiotomy shock, and even mixed vasodilatory shock. This variety perfectly explains why broad, unselected therapies almost always fail to show a survival benefit across the board. Applying a one-size-fits-all therapy to such a diverse array of problems, yeah, that's doomed to fail. We have absolutely got to target our interventions to the specific underlying cause. Now, this brings us to how we actually recognize it at the bedside. While classic shock presents with profound hypotension, we absolutely must be on the lookout for the normotensive subtype. You know, hypoperfusion can absolutely exist even when the systolic blood pressure is sitting at 90 millimeters of mercury or higher. Please do not let a falsely reassuring blood pressure blind you to what's really happening. Even with a normal blood pressure, if your patient has a rising lactate, cold and clammy extremities, oliguria, or an altered sensorium, well, they are in shock and they need your help immediately. Moving on to Section 2, pathophysiology and SCAI staging. Let's look at the cascade of deterioration. Let's actually trace how this deterioration happens, step by step. It's basically a textbook vicious cycle. It all kicks off with cardiac injury. Could be ischemic, inflammatory, mechanical, whatever. This injury drops the stroke volume, which obviously tanks your cardiac output. Organ hypoperfusion sets in quickly, driving up lactate levels because your tissues are literally starving for oxygen. So how does the body respond? With massive sympathetic activation. You get intense peripheral vasoconstriction and fluid retention. And while the body is trying to compensate, this response actually drives up both afterload and preload, which worsens the cardiac congestion, drops the output even further, and ultimately triggers irreversible multi-organ failure. And this pathophysiology leads to some very distinct clinical phenotypes. Take the classic cold and wet presentation. Intense vasoconstriction leaves their extremities ice cold, while raised filling pressures leave their lungs wet and congested. But contrast that with the warm and wet mixed shock phenotype. In these patients, severe systemic inflammation causes paradoxical vasodilation. They are still congested, but their vascular resistance has completely collapsed. Recognizing the difference between these two at the bedside, that's a real game changer because it completely dictates how you manage your vasopressors. To make sure everyone on the multidisciplinary team is speaking the exact same language, we use the SCAI staging ladder. It's super straightforward. Stage A is at risk. Stage B is beginning shock. They might be hypotensive, but there's no overt hypoperfusion yet. Stage C is classic shock, where you absolutely need to intervene. Stage D is deteriorating shock, meaning they are actively failing your initial therapies. And finally, Stage E is extremis. This is full circulatory collapse, often involving active cardiac arrest. Throwing these letters around on rounds immediately aligns the whole ICU team on exactly how sick the patient really is. Let's jump into Section 3, the ICU bedside assessment. This is your rapid-fire checklist. Okay, so you're standing at the bedside, you need a mental framework for those first 5 minutes. Ask yourself, is this actually true cardiogenic shock? What's the specific cause? Are we talking a massive STEMI, a blown papillary muscle, or right ventricular failure from a massive PE? Is there pulmonary congestion? Is that lactate climbing? Are they even responding to your initial norepinephrine drip, or are they crashing harder? Do we need to call the cath lab right this second for revascularization, or get the shock team on the line for mechanical support? And, crucially, especially if they came in post-arrest, is there severe anoxic brain injury that might completely change our goals of care? Now that we've assessed the patient, let's apply the Lancet's 10-step framework for management. Section 4, a stepwise algorithm. All right, steps 1 through 5. This is all about immediate, rapid stabilization. First, confirm the shock state by checking perfusion markers like lactate and get a stat echo and ECG to identify the cause. Next, optimize their oxygenation and carefully manage that preload. You've got to decongest the ones who need it. By step 5, you should be initiating vasopressor support, and we're usually reaching for norepinephrine here to maintain a perfusing pressure. Then we move into the advanced therapies with steps 6 through 10. If low output persists despite your pressors, it's time to add an inotrope. For your acute myocardial infarctions, early revascularization of that culprit artery is the priority. In highly selected, specific cases, you might consider mechanical support. All the while, you need to be aggressively managing secondary issues like acute kidney injury. And step 10, honestly, it's the most important one. Reassess, reassess, reassess. You have to constantly ask if you need to escalate, de-escalate, or pivot to palliative care. Let's dive a bit deeper into those specific interventions in Section 5, meds and revascularization. Let's talk drugs. Think of this as your pharmacological playbook. Norepinephrine is going to be your go-to first-line vasopressor. Dopamine is an alternative, sure, but keep in mind that trials like SOAP2 have shown it carries a much higher risk of tachyarrhythmias. Epinephrine is another option, but man, use it with extreme caution in AMI-related shock. Evidence actually suggests it might increase the rate of refractory shock because it dramatically spikes myocardial oxygen demand. As for your inodilators, we're looking at dobutamine or milrinone. Recent data, like the DOREMI trial, honestly shows no clear winner between the two. But here is the absolute golden rule, the biggest takeaway for anyone managing these patients. You must titrate all catecholamines to the absolute lowest dose that restores perfusion. Higher doses just equal more myocardial toxicity. More is definitely not better here. Now, if we're dealing with an ischemic cause, you know the drill. Time is myocardium. Following shock onset, they need rapid transfer to the cath lab. But here's where the strategy gets really interesting based on the culprit shock trial. If they have multivessel disease, early intervention should absolutely focus on PCI of the culprit vessel only. We don't try to be heroes and fix every single blockage right then and there. We stabilize the main issue causing the shock and rely on a delayed, staged, complete revascularization for the rest once the patient is actually out of extremis. Finally, let's look at the heavy artillery in Section 6, mechanical and organ support. Advanced devices are amazing tools, but they are absolutely not magic bullets. Patient selection is everything. Take the intra-aortic balloon pump, the IABP. It gives you diastolic augmentation, but based on really robust trial data, it is no longer routinely recommended for unselected AMI-related shock. Then you have VA ECMO. It provides massive, full cardiopulmonary bypass support, but it comes with terrifyingly high risks of bleeding, vascular complications, and left ventricular distension that can actually damage the heart even more. And the Impella? It gives you microaxial forward flow, actively unloading the LV. Recent data, like the Danger shock trial, did show a benefit, but only in highly selected STEMI-related shock patients at very experienced centers. And again, severe complications like limb ischemia are very real risks. Identifying the right patient is way more critical than just knowing how to turn the machine on. Of course, we can't just fixate on the heart and forget the rest of the patient. General organ support is key. Positive pressure ventilation is a fantastic tool. It reduces the work of breathing and drops LV afterload, which can actually help push blood forward in LV failure. But wait, here's the catch. If you're dealing with a right ventricular predominant shock, positive pressure is a double-edged sword. It reduces venous return and spikes pulmonary vascular resistance, which can literally collapse an already struggling right ventricle. Also, keep a close eye on the liver and kidneys. Up to 35% of these patients develop AKI, and many get hypoxic hepatitis. And remember, especially if you've got them on mechanical support, you have to aggressively manage those super high risks of bleeding and clotting. And that brings us to the most difficult, but absolutely vital question you'll face at the bedside. Is further escalation actually appropriate, or are we just facing clinical futility? Look, as clinicians, our ultimate goal isn't just to make the numbers on a monitor look pretty or maintain a blood pressure with a pump. Our goal is to return that patient to a meaningful quality of life. If severe anoxic brain injury or massive multi-organ failure has already set in, we have to have the courage and, frankly, the compassion to transition to palliative care. Keep your physiology structured, keep your interventions targeted, and always, Always keep the patient's ultimate humanity in focus. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. To really master the finer details here, I highly recommend reading the full Lancet review. I hope this structured approach gives you some confidence for your next ICU shift.